Howdy. Breathing is important, which I think on the surface of things seems very intuitive. Yet it's something small that we frequently overlook. Or when we do think about breathing, there's this big production of being told that we need to do all these things, like breathe in shapes, or breathe mindfully, or breathe in meditation. All of these different types of breath work are helpful, yet I don't want them to distract, deter, or overwhelm people in getting started. This video is about a few considerations when starting a breathing practice. There are no shoulds or have tos, just some things to keep in mind that are going to be helpful unto themselves and also provide a good foundation to explore some more advanced breathing techniques. And I think that sounds pretty cool. Advanced breathing techniques. When first starting a breathing practice, I will oftentimes encourage clients to take a couple of simple steps. And these are just some general rules of thumb that might help jumping into this practice in an unstructured way, and yet still get some good results. First, I want to address the benefits of breathing, which frequently come back to a physiological response. 5 minutes of slow, deep breaths, which would be about 12 seconds per breath, will frequently be sufficient to trigger our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest. Now, this is the counterbalance to the fight, flight, or freeze response that we experience with anxiety. But in that parasympathetic response, we feel like we're in a safe, calm space that our physiological arousal starts to decrease. So a few basic pointers in getting into breath work that can help us take our first steps towards cultivating a routine of our own. To start, we need to give ourselves sufficient time to breathe. And as I indicated, roughly 5 minutes is a good marker. Though you can start for shorter periods of time if that feels more comfortable, and then kind of work your way up. To gauge this 5 minutes, I often encourage people to do one of two things. Either A, set a timer for the amount of time that they plan to breathe, or B, identify a song that's a similar length. Selecting a song that can be a part of breath work can be very rewarding because we can start to associate that sense of being grounded and calm with a particular external trigger. In other words, the song. And the more that we pair those and associate that deep breathing, relaxed state with this trigger, the easier it's going to be to get into that state when the song or the trigger is provided. Regardless, the intention behind having either an alarm or a song is that it gives us a period of time in which we can work towards allowing ourselves to let go and relax into our breath. Because our conscious ego, in other words, that part of us that kind of controls and regulates our day-to-day living, because that can identify a period of time so that we're not distracted by work things or we're not distracted by other kind of competing demands, but instead we know that this is a time that we can pause. And then we set the alarm or we turn on the song and we can trust that the alarm or the song is going to end and trigger us to get out of that state, or in essence to come back and kind of get into other activities. Because we've allocated this time in an intentional way, we're able to more fully relax into that work. By contrast, if we just start to do this practice without a predetermined time, or we haven't assessed what else is going on in our day, such as different activities that we need to attend to, then we might start to feel anxious and worried. We might have these thoughts about, when am I going to know that this is going to end? When do I know to pull into a different activity? What if something comes up? What if I fall asleep? And that's what makes having an alarm or a song so helpful, is because it can cue us about when that period of time is over and we're ready to move on to something else. It also allows us to work with our thoughts that might come up. We can work on redirecting any thoughts that might feel kind of anxious or sad, kind of pull us into other things. When those thoughts come up, we can identify them and start to redirect by saying things like, this is something that I can pick up once the alarm goes off, but for right now, I'm going to focus on this one breath in this one moment. And so it helps not only in allocating time, but also in redirecting any worried thoughts that might come up. The next tip is about how we breathe. That no matter what type of practice we're doing, we want to ensure that we're taking satisfying breaths. Yes, deep and slow breaths can be helpful in getting a fuller sense of relaxation from our practice. But frequently during our day, we're breathing into our chest. And our chest only expands so much so that we take these shallow breaths. And when we start to notice our breaths with an intentional practice, we can start to move our breaths into our belly. And one way to notice this is that if we're taking chest breaths, we'll sometimes see that our chest expands and our shoulders go up and down. But when we're taking belly breaths, we find our stomach goes in and out. And sometimes we might exaggerate that motion in order to get into a sense of what it feels like to breathe into our belly. And those belly breaths are oftentimes what singers use in order to enhance their vocalizations, bringing up the sound from a deeper point within their body, allowing for more expansive air intake. And so just noticing how our belly moves versus our shoulders and our chest. And so we might actually put our hands on our stomach and just notice that moving in and out. Now, when we first start breathing, we don't necessarily need to try and control it or slow it down to a certain rhythm, but instead we kind of just trust that our body's going to breathe as it will naturally and allow that to deepen over the course of our work. When we first start breathing, there can sometimes be a desire to take a deep breath in. And if we cannot take in a deep breath, we start to feel dissatisfied or even anxious about our breathing. I'm not doing this right. Shifting both our focus and our starting point is one way to work towards really satisfying big, deep breaths. And it's super small and easy. If we want to inhale big breaths, we need to first focus on exhaling big breaths. And so rather than focusing on breathing in at first, we want to focus on breathing out to begin with. And we'll find that over the course of our practice, we'll start to be breathing fuller, deeper, slower breaths because we're creating space through the exhale. So setting a timer, 5 minutes or so, or maybe identifying a song to regulate that time, redirecting our thoughts that might come up to say that this is time that we're just going to focus on breathing, focusing on breathing into our belly instead of our chests, and noticing that exhale instead of the inhale. All of this can help us start a simple practice for ourselves and also be added to mindful breathing, meditation, breathing shapes, or any other type of structured practice. However, thinking about these as kind of the basic foundational elements of this work can help us apply these to pretty much all breathing type meditations and cultivate our own unique practice. The last piece to consider is when and where we might engage in this practice. It's a bit of a scheduling consideration. And the best place to begin is to examine what pre-existing activities already exist, in which 5 minutes of breath work might be added. It's typically easier to add this type of practice to something that's already in our schedule. It might be that you do it after exercising in the morning and before you get cleaned up. Or maybe you link it to your lunchtime, that you have lunch, you do some breathing, and then you get back to your job. Or it could be a step in your bedtime routine, that maybe you journal, you do some breath work, and then you start to get cleaned up. Regardless, look for something that you already do regularly and just add it in. So for myself, I've identified a song that I've been using for about the past 8 years, and every day I listen to it. It's roughly 5 minutes long. I typically start with a busy mind and shallow breaths, and by the end of the song, I notice that my breaths are slow, they're in my stomach, and I'm really focused or noticing that exhale. For me, I do it in the morning before I practice my drum. The practice was already there, and I just kind of added the breath work to it. However, my routine, my song, when I do this, is not going to fit for everyone. And so I encourage you to explore something similar and to think about how this might fit into your life. Experiment with songs and timers and environments and points in time during the day. Find your own unique recipe. Once you get the hang of it, you might consider more advanced breathing techniques. Thanks.